Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us today for the wheelchair training webinar series by experts. Today, we have Sarah Clayton from Simple Stuff Works Associates from the UK, and she will be presenting on the topic, translating theory to assessment and assessment to intervention. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your time today. Over to you.
Oh, thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. I don't know what time it is in your part of the world, but it's Friday afternoon here, which is always a great feeling. Thank you so much for joining me. I was slightly terrified yesterday when I found out how many people had signed up to the webinar. So hopefully you won't see my hands too much because my little shaky hands will give away that slight sense of overwhelm I have at the moment. Okay, we have the chat. I have the chat open on the screen, and if you would like to put questions into the chat, that would be that's absolutely fine. I will try really hard to keep things concise and to make sure that my language is as clear as possible. I have a tendency to talk too quickly. So if I'm doing that, please just stick it into the chat that I need to slow down. But a little bit about myself before we begin. I am a salaried full-time employee of Simple Stuff Works, and we manufacture and distribute therapeutic positioning equipment in the UK, also in a number of other countries. I'm a director of Goldsmith and Goldsmith, and I provide measurement of body symmetry, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today, and consultancy to privately funded clients. I provide online and face-to-face training in partnership with an organisation called Born at the Right Time. And I also work with a number of other experts within their field on a coaching platform for paediatric therapists, which is run by Wired on Development and is called Clinical Excellence Online. My contact details are at the end of the presentation, so if anybody would like to get in touch, that would be great. So what we're going to do, I think a couple of people are not on mute. It would be great if you could stick yourselves on mute, only because bitter experience tells me that all sorts of stuff gets shared accidentally when people don't realise that they are not on mute. So what we're going to think about is the translation of assessment, what have I put there? Theory to assessment and assessment to intervention. And I specialise in the use of nighttime positioning predominantly. So I am interested in supported lying. And the reason for that is because not everyone can sit, but everyone can lie. So if we get lying right, we have the potential to protect individuals from the predictable harm caused by gravity in order to protect their seated posture, their function, and so on. And it's a huge topic, positioning. And what I wanted to do today was really be absolutely clear about the positioning that I'm thinking about today. So we ask ourselves at the very beginning of working with an individual, what are we positioning for? Are we positioning for comfort, for function? Are we positioning for pressure? Are we positioning for safety? And what I'm thinking about today in particular is about positioning for therapy. So we're thinking about therapeutic force being used in the lying position. But that doesn't mean to say that we just ignore all of the others. So when we think about positioning for therapy, it doesn't mean that we ignore safety and we ignore comfort and we ignore function, but it's simply today to be absolutely clear that this is the one small part that we're focusing on, and then we can think about those other parts at another time. What we're going to do, we're going to think about the patterns of distortion as they relate to the habitual lying posture. We're going to think how those patterns are translated into an assessment. And then we'll think about how we apply therapeutic force based on what we find in our assessment. And the assessment that I'm thinking about, and I will share with you, is called the Goldsmith Indices of Body Symmetry. And on our YouTube channel, you will find all of our training is freely accessible on our YouTube channel, including a playlist that will take you 1 hour and 20 minutes to work through. That's all about the Goldsmith Indices. So we're going to have a snapshot of it today, but all of the information is freely available if you want to follow it up. So changes in body shape are highly predictable. In a previous marriage, my surname was Hill. And in 2010, I worked with John Goldsmith, who happens to be my dad. And we wrote and had published the patterns of the biomechanics of body shape distortion. And we were looking specifically at the habitual lying posture. And we developed a model that means that we can predict changes in body shape based on the habitual lying posture. And there's also the work from Jackie Casey, which was published in 2020. The references are all at the end of the presentation. I will also share with Krithika, I will share the whole presentation. There are a couple of slides I can't share, but the whole thing will come out to you. So in my mind, I'm thinking about predictability means potential. If we know what's going to happen, then we have the potential to do something to change the path, to change the direction that the individual in front of us may well be heading off. And I am really privileged to work both with very young children all the way through to supporting adults with late stage dementia. So I work across the board, and what that gives us as an organization, what it gives me as somebody working directly with people, is it gives me a really clear view that the things that I see happening when children are very young, if we do nothing to intervene, will progress over time. And what we need to think about is how we can support individuals and those closest to them to also see what we see. Because I'm absolutely sure that there are many, many people on this webinar who have also, kind of done their time with regards to thinking about supporting individuals, and they've seen the devastation caused by changes in body shape over time. I also forgot to mention, I started working in supported lying in 1998. So this is my 25th year. I still don't know all the answers, but I do know lots and lots of the questions that are asked of me, and I'm really happy to share the experience that I've had over that time. So what we're looking at here is a pattern of distortion that we would describe as windsweeping. The individuals are windswept to their right, and they have what we would call anti-clockwise chest rotation, and that's the rotation element is the work that I did with John to develop the sternospinal line model. And this is an exercise that I do with individuals every time that I'm working with somebody, is I will put their seating at the end of the bed, and we will think about how do we get from the bed to the chair? And is it a complicated journey from the bed to the chair, or is it a simple journey? And all we do is we think about how we make that journey simpler. So there are some phenomenal individuals working in this field. And if you're interested in really thorough assessment of seating and lying, then check out postureandmobility.com and Sharon Sutherland and Jen McKee. But don't be fooled by the idea that supported lying is simple. It's far from simple. The patterns of distortion are relatively simple. The interventions are pretty simple. But as soon as we involve humans, the whole thing becomes much, much more complicated. And there's an amazing piece of work by a therapist in New Zealand called Jane Hamer. And she worked with families to understand their experiences of using supported lying, particularly at night. And again, at the end of the presentation, there's a link both to her research and also to a podcast that I developed alongside my colleague Rachel, interviewing Jane to really get to the bottom of her findings. So this is the model that John and I developed. And it basically involves us understanding, hopefully you can see my cursor, it involves us understanding the influence of what we call the sternospinal line, which is an imaginary line. John and I wanted to help people to see what we were seeing inside our heads, hence this model. So we came up with this idea of the sternospinal line as this imaginary line that runs between sternum and spine. And when somebody is typical, and it's really important that we keep coming back to typical, because a typical conventional body shape is what we are hoping to protect from young children all the way through as they grow, and so on. So keep coming back to typical. And in a typical body shape, when we lie down, if we put our knees upright to the ceiling, our pelvis is level and our sternum is central. And what we're thinking about is, how do people deviate from that typical structure? So keep in your mind, just for the next 25 minutes, sternum should be central, pelvis should be level, and level in relation to the horizontal. So we're not talking about obliquity. We would be talking about rotation if we were in seating, but we are lying down. Our known constant is the horizontal, and we are looking at whether the pelvis is level in relation to the horizontal. Now, this is the sternospinal line. The best way to do this is to make yourself a model chest, which is really easy. You can buy things if you want to. I tend to find when I'm working with families, one thing I've forgotten to tell you, when I'm working with families and with individuals themselves, I don't talk about sternospinal lines. What I talk about is the chest being a tower, and the tower, at the top of the tower, is a heavy weight. And if we don't provide stability to this very flexible structure, then the tower will fall over. The tower will either get squashed if the person is compressing, or the tower will fall over and we will see rotation. So when I'm out and about, what I tend to use and what I encourage therapists to use and families is a piece of paper. You just fold it in half. A bit of sellotape is really helpful, because otherwise it becomes a bit messy. And what you create is a model of the chest. So the paper is the chest, and your pencil is your imaginary sternospinal line. And what we can see is that if our sternospinal line is if our sternospinal line is at an angle, what we see is that the chest distorts, and we end up with those chest shapes that you know very well. So at the bottom with the spine, and we've got the rib distortion at the spine there. At the front, we've got the rib flare just here, and we've got a sternum that is no longer central. Or you could look at compression if you wanted to, if the sternospinal line is vertical, or if it is fully horizontal, you can also look at compression. So it's a really good little trick for helping people to see what you're seeing. So wind sweeping, and we're thinking about wind sweeping for those individuals who have very, very limited movement. And the reason that I say that is because when we measure using the Goldsmith Indices, the more independent movement somebody has, then the less true these patterns hold in terms of the measurement. But we're thinking here about individuals who have very limited movement. So wind sweeping is a whole body phenomenon. Wind sweeping does not simply happen from the pelvis down, all right? We're thinking about, and I'll show you in a second, but we're thinking about the influence of the position of the legs on the whole body. And wind sweeping occurs very often when I'm working with therapists, I will ask them to show me what wind sweeping is. And invariably, they will lie down on their back with their legs to one side to show me. And then it becomes more challenging when I ask, well, what about wind sweeping in sideline? And what about wind sweeping in prone? So the thing to keep in mind is that wind sweeping is not exclusive to supine lying. It happens in all unsupported postures. And it eventually, over time, has an impact on body structure. But when we think about the F words, changes in body shape. Oh, hello. Justin, you're not on mute. When we think about changes in body shape and we think about the F words, those changes will have an impact on all of the F words. Okay. So we need to, and again, we come back to that idea of protection of symmetry. If we're working with very small children, very young children, restoration to symmetry, if at all possible, hence the therapeutic element. Or if we have somebody with an extremely distorted body shape, we will be looking, we kind of start with what we can restore, and then we will work back to, kind of what is possible. Quick word on language. When we talk about wind sweeping, we talk about to the person's left and to the person's right. So this little skeleton here is windswept to their right. And just a quick note, look at the sternospinal line. Okay, so if your legs are falling, did I just say that windswept right? This little skeleton is windswept left. Look, it's in massive letters there. So windswept left, and what we will tend to see, if we look at the orientation of that line, we think about the tower, and we think about the tower falling over. So we can look at what we would talk about is clockwise rotation, tends to be associated with somebody who is windswept left, and anti-clockwise rotation with somebody who is windswept right. Not all the time, but for the majority of the time, that's what we see. So there we go. So we start to see a pattern. So if somebody's legs are allowed to fall or are drawn over to their left, we can expect to see clockwise rotation in the chest, and vice versa if they're windswept right. So clockwise, again, another word around language. When we think about clockwise rotation, we are standing at the foot of the bed and we are looking up the person's body. So whilst wind sweeping is the person's left or right, when we talk about clockwise and anti-clockwise rotation in lying, if we're using this model, then it's from the therapist's point of view. I pointed at myself as a therapist. I'm a biologist by background. I'm not a therapist. So clockwise rotation, or the tower is falling over in a clockwise direction, or the sternum is moving towards the person's left arm. And you will tend to see a rib distortion here, a rib flare here. You will tend to see, as the spine comes round, you will tend to see a rib distortion on the person's back, and they will tend to be narrower, a narrower gap between lower ribs and aces on their left than on their right. And this is what it looks like in life. So what we can start to think about is, if the tower is falling over, how do we get the tower upright again? Okay, how do we restore symmetry? Keep in mind the idea of typical, and how do we, if someone is moving away from typical, how do we get them back to typical? Anti-clockwise rotation, you will be surprised to know, is all in the opposite direction. So again, standing at the foot of the bed, we have the tower is falling over in an anti-clockwise direction. We have the rib flare here, rib flare on the person's, rib distortion on the person's back, and a narrowing tends to be on the person's right. They will tend to lean to their right. And here's what it might look like in life. Okay. So what we can start to see is how we can translate. Let me just 1 second turn my email off. That was very unprofessional of me, but there we go. So what we can start to see is if I look at this unsupported lying posture, I'm looking at somebody who is windswept right, and I will expect to see anti-clockwise rotation. So when I come to assess that person, everything's here. Everything that I see here, she's telling me in this picture here. Okay, it's a really it's a pretty straightforward thing that's happening. And if we look at this young man, so he's lying on his you see, this is not easy for a person who struggles with their left and right. He's lying on his right side, but whereas when what we're thinking about again is that sternospinal line, so he's windswept left, okay, because his legs are going to be drawn to his left, pelvis will go in the opposite direction, and we are looking at clockwise rotation at the chest. Okay. So we can start to think about, so side lying positions invariably, well, you always have wind sweeping, and symmetrical side lying. I always say to the therapists I work with that symmetrical side lying is a unicorn. And if you bring me somebody who lies symmetrically on their side, I promise I will bring you a unicorn. So symmetrical compression in prone is really rare. So we've talked a little bit about side lying. Sorry, somebody else is not on mute. Herbert. Cheers. So we thought a little bit about side lying. There's lots of twists and turns in side lying. Think about prone. So symmetrical compression in prone, and what we're looking at here is our sternospinal line. If the sternospinal line, as I said, is vertical, then we will get compression as opposed to rotation. But what we've got is we've put the heavy spine on top and we are compressing the whole body. We will tend to see a very, very flattened chest. It very rarely happens because people have a tendency to turn their head. Positioning in prone for very long periods of time reinforces the head turn and leads to long asymmetric lordoses and wind sweeping. Absolutely predictable. So here we have a young man in prone, windswept right, anti-clockwise rotation of the chest, which is exactly what we see when he sits up. So we're going to think about the Goldsmith Indices of body symmetry. And as I said, there's an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm going to belt through this quite quickly. There's an hour and 20 minutes worth of videos if you want to watch them, all about the assessment. And what I think it's really important to say out loud is that it would be really easy to think, well, I don't have that equipment, therefore this is not for me. But there is the most phenomenal work, and in particular that the work of Tamara Kittleson and Eleanor's project, where we're not thinking about having the kind of the all singing or dancing equipment, and yet they are producing the most phenomenal results. So think about the principles that underpin the assessment as opposed to seeing the barriers to the use of this assessment. The first thing we think about is when the knees are upright, is the pelvis level? And if the pelvis, remember I said about in relation to the horizontal, if the pelvis is higher on the person's left, then they are windswept to their left. And if the pelvis, this is when the knees are upright. So when you bring the knees upright, checking what's happening at the pelvis. If the left side is higher in relation to the horizontal, they are windswept left. And if the right side of the pelvis is higher in relation to the horizontal, they are windswept right. We look to see what we can, because we want an optimal starting position, and that starting position is consistent. So we measure from a known zero every time. So we're not, there are lots of measures out there. The Goldsmith Indices was validated back in 1992. So it has been around probably longer than some of the people that are on this call. The next thing we do is we look at two measures. We measure from xiphoid process to lateral border on the right, and xiphoid process to lateral border on the left. We do not measure from xiphoid process down to the supporting surface, because as you saw in the last couple of photos that I've shared, we end up with rib flares and rib distortions that change, they mask the asymmetry that we're looking at. So we go xiphoid process to lateral border on the right and on the left, and we look at the depth. And what we then do is we convert those raw measures into a ratio, because then I can, if a person gains weight or loses weight, or if a child has the, you know, kind of the cheek to grow in between our assessments, then I can still compare the results from 6 months ago to now. So a typical range with regards to depth width, 0.65 to 0.85. The lower the number, the flatter you are, and the higher the number, the rounder you are. And we want people between 0.65 to 0.85. And then we think about the rotational measurement. If a person from xiphoid process to lateral border is the same measure either side, they will measure as 1 with their ratio, their right-left ratio. And that's great, because when we do it consistently, if someone has a right-left ratio of more than 1, we know they are clockwise, and less than 1, we know they are anti-clockwise. And that tells us the therapeutic force that we need to put in lying in order to get that tower back where we want that tower to be. So just a couple of things. So if we have clockwise rotation in the chest, the tower is falling over. What we want is to restore that symmetry. So we put in some derotation. We roll the person in their lying posture so that their sternum is central. And even if we have someone whose sternum is central, we still use support either side of the chest to hold. We talk about it being like scaffolding. So it's reinforcing the chest so that the person is able to breathe easily. We know that if we just leave the chest unsupported, then we are inviting compression distortions, which is not what we want. So what's important is that this is not a lateral force. So if the tower is falling over and you apply force from either side, the tower will continue to fall over inside the lateral support that you've put in. It is a rotation that we put in to the lying posture. And that's the therapeutic element of supported lying that may be slightly different than if we were positioning somebody for comfort. So it's just getting, it's the positioning technique needs to match what we are hoping to achieve for the individual. So, and we need to be really clear on that. So here we are with somebody who has, hopefully you're starting to see that what we're looking at here is clockwise rotation of the chest. And what we do is, remember, sternum central. And that's, you know, if you are typical, then you're sternum central. So that's what we're trying to emulate. So we block this side of the body. We roll the person. So we're tilting the tower back round until we have that sternum central. But before we do that, because we know it's going to happen, before we do that, we say to his mum, who was the person who was with him, he has a rib flare here. And when we do this, you're going to see that rib flare probably more than you've ever seen it. But that's okay. That's what we expect to happen. And it is what happens pretty much all the time. So she isn't, you know, she's not terrified by, you know, if we don't mention the fact that his chest looks strange, then she's, you know, she's going to leave thinking, well, you know, kind of, did nobody else see that? I saw that, you know, that doesn't make sense to me. So we preempt those you know, what we're expecting to see, and we make sure that people are comfortable with it. But this is where it gets really exciting, because we end up in the realms, if we're getting the right therapeutic force in, then we end up within the realms of what we could call postural molding, where we know that gravity is our enemy, just in generally life, as we age in particular. But gravity can be our friend. We can use gravity because we know the impact of gravity. If I leave this young man, I've lost my cursor, there it is. If we leave this young man with his tower at an angle, falling over, gravity is coming down, and it's just, this continues night after night. But here he is just 3 months later, having had, and he's got support there and he's got support here, but there is nothing either side of him here. But after just 3 months of consistent therapeutic positioning, and it was at night for this young man, but 3 months of consistent positioning, look at the difference between those bony markers that we look for. So we're looking for what's the relationship between sternum and aces, and you know, we're moving towards symmetry, which is really exciting. But if you're seeing asymmetry of structure, which is what we've just talked about measuring, then you've already missed the boat, because what you might have missed, or what you will have missed, is asymmetry of movement. So we're going to just take a moment, because now what we're going to think about is typical movement and symmetry of that movement again. And what we're thinking about, in 2 things I want you to look for in the next video. So we have the leg angle and we have the resulting pelvic angle. Okay, so leg angle, pelvic angle, and this is what you're interested in here. This angle, the angle between the legs and the pelvis. It's called your ab-lap, angle between legs and pelvis. So let's check out what we see here. So in typical, what we have is, as Nell takes her legs over to her right, there is her leg angle, and here is her resulting pelvic angle. So here the legs go over to her right, the left side of her pelvis rises. Look at where her sternum ends up. Okay, so the sternum, her sternum is central. However, if you take her legs over to the side, the sternum is no longer central. It follows the direction of the legs. So there we go. And if you watch her come back again, we could catch her just there. And when the knees are upright, her pelvis is level. And then as she goes over to the other side, then we again have her leg angle and her resulting pelvic angle. And look where her sternum has ended up now. So again, the chest follows the legs. So that's typical. And when she is lying still, when her knees are upright, her pelvis is level. So if she is, let me just move this out of the way a second. So when she is, and Nell is symmetrical. So what we would see if we were measuring these leg angles and pelvic angles is that the ab-lap when she goes to the right is the same as the ab-lap when she goes to the left. That's what we would expect to see. And what we see in individuals who are becoming windswept, before we see signs of that as a structural asymmetry, what we will see is the ab-lap on the right is bigger than the ab-lap on the left. So we pick up signs of asymmetry of movement before we pick up asymmetry of structure. And that's and it will correct in that order as well. So you will with consistent therapeutic positioning, you will see improvement in asymmetry of movement before you see improvement in asymmetry of structure. So there we go. If someone is windswept left, the ab-lap on the left is greater than the ab-lap on the right. And you may not have the equipment to measure this. You can feel it. You will feel it in your those fabulous hands of yours as you are moving people. So think about how you can take the principles of this measure and incorporate them into your practice. And if you get a bit lost with regards to the ABLAP, the reason for this slide is if you can't remember anything that I've been talking to you about here, think about the extremes. Think about that person whose pelvis is absolutely flat and whose legs touch the supporting surface, and think about how big that ABLAP would be on their right and on their left. Okay, so we talk about, and we would say somebody is windswept to the left or to the right, to the side with the greater ABLAP. So we thought about what we can do with regards to positioning the chest. So we could involve derotation. We always use decompression. We can use those two together. But now we're thinking about supporting the pelvis and legs. So we can think about flashy bits and pieces like this, like a stabilizer, or you might just think about using 2 pillows, as we have here. It's one of the things that we do. We talked about decompression at the chest. The other thing that we do is we provide support for the pelvis in order to offload the sacrum. So we use laterals this way on. There's, I don't know if you can see the plastic lateral there, and there is a plastic one there. So we use those either side of the pelvis to hold the pelvis and offload the sacrum. We always have the support at the chest, and then we're holding the legs. We always make sure that we, oh, sorry, that's the next slide. But in your assessment, it may be that we've got somebody who is significantly windswept. And what I won't do is use the annotation feature on Zoom, because it's let me down so many times before. So you could be forgiven for thinking that this person has not been positioned. He absolutely has. But the key to somebody with existing distortion is to go slow. So what we have here, underneath here, is a horseshoe pillow. So rather than let his legs fall all the way to the supporting surface, we have a horseshoe pillow here. We have another one here, and you can see the blanket. That's all we could get between his legs, just to give just a little bit of a space. He has support here, and he has support here. And what we did some derotation with him, so we were able to roll him a little. There were we also worked to bring his pelvis down a little on this side. So I should have a before picture, shouldn't I? But his pelvis ends up underneath his ribs. So he is as positioned as he could be. And this position he managed for about 10 minutes. So, which is a massive, if you think about holding a squat for 10 minutes, massive, massive achievement. So if someone has a significant distortion, then the key is to go slow. It's all the same principles, but we go slow. The other thing is that if you bring his knees upright, you'll just his pelvis will end up at a crazy angle, and you know it's just not something you don't go anywhere near. And then key things to think about when we're supporting the legs, well, supporting the whole of the person's body, is there should be no daylight between the person and the supporting surface, apart from at the heels. Okay, if possible, then we would offload the heels. We accommodate flexion. We absolutely hold the person's body in flexion. We all sleep in flexion. All right, it's and if we don't flex, if we don't have enough flexion at the hip, then this person will end up with backache, and they won't tolerate the position that we've tried to get them into. So trying to get people to sleep with their legs in extension is probably a whole other webinar of why that doesn't make sense. Okay, so we accommodate flexion. There should be no daylight, and we always make sure that the soles of the feet are supported. And that lesson I learned from a therapist in Belgium who is called Jo de Klerk. I learned more from an hour in Jo's company than I had in probably 10 years. So absolutely do check him out. And there is, again, a link to him in the references. And then what we think about when we're introducing therapeutic positioning is we think about how we monitor progress. And I could do that with measurement. So here is how we do it. We have an online portal where people upload their measurement results, which is free for anybody to use who has access to the kit. But the easiest way of monitoring progress is through photographs. Photographs are phenomenal. And there are 3 key photographs that I ask all families to take that I work with. So the first is to think about their habitual position. What's the position that the person spends the vast majority of time in when they're lying? I ask for this photograph, which is like we talk about, so in mining, when people go underground to get coal and all the rest of it, it used to be that they would take a canary, a little bird, down under the ground with them. And if the bird fell over, it meant that there were poisonous gases. This picture here is your miner's canary. It's your early warning sign that there are things happening in terms of rotation or compression to this person's chest. And the last one I ask families to take is this one, because I want to know the relationship between lower ribs and pelvis. And again, Sharon Sutherland, there is a YouTube video of Sharon talking about the life box, which is fabulous. So key considerations. Firstly is about safety and the risk benefit between the habitual posture and the intended posture. And it will be that there are individuals for whom a therapeutic position where we get that sternum to central, etc., just is not possible because of the way that they breathe. It may be that they breathe to the side and we've put support in that then blocks that movement, and so on. So we think all the time about safety. And then the next part there, I have the question marks are deliberate. So sleep systems. I implore you not to use the term sleep system wherever you are in the world, whether you're in the UK, wherever you are, because when you talk about sleep and introducing this equipment, you raise the stakes really high for families who are already sleep deprived, who are already struggling. And so to introduce this at night time is the end of a long journey. So it needs to be supported lying or therapeutic positioning, great. Sleep systems, no. You know, the next thing you need to think about are the person's priorities. Theirs might be different to yours. So you need to see how you align your priorities and what you're thinking about in terms of intervention to theirs. Sleep deprivation is massive. I've just mentioned it. Don't go near interrupting people's sleep if they are telling you that they can't manage. And the last one is being very aware of the danger of being the posture police rather than the person-centered practitioner. So you have your priorities and your goals. The families you're supporting absolutely have theirs, and it's how do you get those to move along together in a way that enables everybody to succeed. And finally, with a little time, and when I say a little time, I mean a lot of time. So this is 4 years. This is Michael over a 4-year period. And the lot of hard work is not me. It's the care team that we're supporting Michael. And it is hard work to be doing this consistently over a long period. But with a little time, we can make a massive difference. And we can make a difference not only in body structure, but also in muscle tone. So this little girl is 6 in the first 2 pictures. And she is 4 years later, she is 10 in this picture here. Look at the amount of derotation we have in place. So she's rotating anti-clockwise. We introduce clockwise rotation to get her sternum central. Look at her little shoulder girdle. It tells you how much rotation we've got in there. By the age of 10, we don't need the rotation because we've restored the chest symmetry. She is back to typical. There was a 7 centimeter difference from xiphoid process to lateral border, 7 centimeters wider here than here. Okay. And now in this picture, she's at 1 centimeter difference. And this young woman is 19 in the first picture and 22 in the second picture. And again, consistent positioning night after night. So those are all the references. As I said, apart from those last 3 slides, the whole presentation, I'm more than happy to share with you. And those are my contact details. So I think that's about everything. So what I'll do, I will stop sharing my screen and come back to you all. And there's a question in the chat. So when we will use blanket between the knees and when we'll use 2 pillows under both knees and under both feet, both will use in supine lying position. Okay. So are you thinking about what would indicate the use, like remaining windswept? Is that what you're thinking of? Would you like to unmute yourself? And I know that I've been a bit of a mute police, but it would be lovely if you could.
Yes. Hello, ma'am. Yeah,
I can hear you.
This is Famida.
Hi, Famida.
Yeah. Basically, we use the blanket or a small pillow in side lying position. Yeah. It can be the anti-clockwise chest function or chest movement. Then we can use the blanket or the small pillow. And in supine lying position, to maintain the sternum in the central and the pelvis in the level, we can use the pillow under the knee and the foot is supported over the pillows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
I think so. So we're thinking about having the legs supported central, using a pillow, using a blanket. Sometimes you'll also want something in between the person's legs as well, particularly if they are. So what I've done is wear black, so that's really helpful. So what you might use is a pillow, a blanket in between the person's legs, particularly if they have internal rotation, because we want to just get a little bit of separation.
Yes,
what we want to avoid. So I talk with families all the time about side lying being, it's an inherently destructive position. So unless there are safety reasons for using side lying, then supine is the better option. So supported supine. So it might be that the person needs to use side lying because of reflux, or they're fed through the night, or it could be pressure that they need to have time in side lying, as well as supine. But what we always look to is to minimize that time in side lying.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. It's clear.
Is that okay?
Yes.
How long, minutes or hours, should the patient resume the correct position, and how many times a day? Okay, so the answer is there isn't any research that says how long is effective. My experience is that the longer the person can achieve that supported supine position, the better. What you say there about how many times a day, there's a Medifab, have a great, I'll put the Medifab. If you search for Medifab and their positioning resources, you will find a clock, 24-hour clock, that you can color in for what people are doing at certain times of their day in terms of positioning. So the how many times a day is whenever there is an opportunity that comes up that lends itself to trying this new position. So it could be that you have someone who, it could be, say it's a child in school and they're out of their chair for half an hour. So we would try it then, but making sure that they've got something else to do while they're practicing their lying. I always talk to families about therapeutic positioning is like a football match. So for 1 hour, unsupported, gravity is 1-0. And then for 1 hour supported, you've got a goal. You're now 1-1. So what we need to think about is every opportunity that we have to tip the balance. At the moment, for the vast majority of people, they're like that. Gravity wins. Supported lying is down here. We have to find every single opportunity to try to tip the balance. And when you tip the balance, then you start to see real quick improvements with regards to body shape. So thank you, it's very interesting, and stress the fact that good lying position is so necessary to help us wheelchair professional. Yeah, so every challenge that comes through pretty much every challenge that comes through your door with regards to seating has its roots in lying, because lying is where people are most of the time. So if we can do the two together, then we will see great results. And also we need to think about, if we're introducing therapeutic positioning in lying, is our seating solution going to be able to keep up with that new body shape? So the young man that you saw who had the corrected chest, the reason I have a photograph so soon after seeing him was because of a complete disaster, because he had custom seating. So we have corrected his body shape and he's got nothing to sit in. Okay, so it's a great story that we corrected the body shape. It was an absolute disaster because of the seating, not being able to be flexible enough. What about nighttime? That's the majority of what I do, is I support people to use these techniques at night. It's children in the UK, children are in bed 3 times longer than they are in school. But I sit in schools and there are standers and gait trainers and you name it. There's all of these thousands and thousands of pounds of pieces of equipment, but they're in bed 3 times longer. So if we get bedtime right, then it has a big impact. The reason I haven't stressed bedtime is because there's a whole load of other issues that come up about nighttime. It's the best time to do it. But yeah, thank you for sharing this information. Can you guide which assessment tool can we use for the postural assessment? For the Goldsmith Indices, then there is a specific, what's called an AMI, which is the tool that's used, but they're stupidly expensive because of the way that they're manufactured. So what we think about is how can we use the principles of the measure and apply them in settings where we don't necessarily have that kit. And there are some other, there are a number of postural assessments out there. The what, sorry? Oh, I missed you. There are lots of different postural assessments out there. I have a Dropbox link that can, which I will also share with you, which I've put over the years. I've just collected resources and references and all sorts of things, and I've put them all in Dropbox. I will share the link with you, and you are welcome to download that information. Okay, so it means that after 1 hour, we should maintain that position for an hour. So when we get into a therapeutic position, we need to think about that as a real challenge for the person that we're working with, especially if they have very distorted body shape. So it might be that success is 5 minutes, or it might be that success is 4 hours. There is no number to say you must do this for this amount of time, because we have to listen to the people that we work with. And if I get somebody into what I think is a really good position, sternum central, but it's stretching, you know, like the gap, so that you see we end up with this gap here. So if somebody sits like this and I get them lying like this and I open up here, what will happen is when they get uncomfortable, they will push up and down and they will close it up again. And they might do that after 2 minutes, and they might do it after 4 minutes, or it might be after 20 minutes. My job is to listen and watch. And so that when I make a recommendation to say you try this position for this long, it's with as much involvement as possible from the person, whether they use words or not. So there is no number to say this is how long you have to do it, but the longer you do it, the better. Okay, share the link to the site. It's completely, yeah, Dropbox link, I will share that. I will, so the presentation slides I will send over to Krithika now. The Dropbox link, actually, I might even have it open. No, I don't. I will send that as well. And I will also, yeah, everything is, I will share with you. I'm more than happy to share with you. On the www.simplestuffworks.co.uk, on the Simple Stuff Works website, there is a resources page that you can download everything from there. And there is also a YouTube channel where there is lots of training videos that you can watch. And somebody just asked one other question. Nancy, this is life for many people, right? So my daughter, I didn't mention that my daughter, I am a mum of 4, and my oldest has a complex brain injury. She had a brain tumor when she was 6 and a very significant stroke when she was 9. And she has gone through, she's 22 now, she's doing very, very well. She has gone through periods of time where she has needed therapeutic positioning. Right now, she doesn't. So for some people, need is transient. And then for other people, it is lifelong. So long as the risk is there, so the biggest risk is lack of movement, lack of independent movement. So long as the risk is there, we continue to use therapeutic positioning. So for my daughter, we had a period of time she had no independent movement. She is now walking and moves about in bed and all that sort of stuff. So her risk factor has changed, and so she doesn't use night positioning at the moment. Can we apply? Yes, Beanish, absolutely. So I'm privileged to work across all ages, and absolutely this can be used for people who have existing distortion. You just need to, when we talked at the beginning about why are we using a position, it may be that rather than going all out for therapy and for correction, for some individuals, you need to take a step back and think, okay, we're going to start just with comfort. And we're going to, once that person knows that we prioritize their comfort, we might then start introducing therapeutic intervention. So it's a slower process, but absolutely, definitely. And I think that's all of the questions. And look at that timing. Not bad, not bad.
Perfect timing.
Is that okay?
You did awesome. Thank you so much for this excellent presentation.
Absolute pleasure. I've just seen another question. Yes, I will share the YouTube link. I'll send a chunk of information. It will keep you busy for hours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I will make sure to share all the links along with the recording with everyone. So thank you, everybody, for your time. And thank you once again, Sarah, for such a powerful presentation and for taking the time to answer all the questions. We really sincerely appreciate your efforts.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. So with that note, I will close the webinar for today. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us. Thank you, everybody. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.